Okay, let's take a look at a couple more examples of sketching polynomials. This one we have already factored out for us. So in order to determine the end behavior, we have to say, well, what would we have if we multiply this all back together? Now, I'm not going to do that. We don't need anything except the leading term. So if I start with x times x, that would be our x squared, then we'd get that answer and multiply by this next factor. So that would get me up to x cubed, and then times this last one, that will give me an x to the fourth. So it's positive. I don't care about the last terms. It's positive leading term, and the exponent would be a 4. So because it's positive, the right side should go up. Because the exponent is even, that means both sides are going to do the same thing. So it would look something like going up on the left, going up on the right. We're going to figure out what happens in the middle. So to figure out what happens in the middle, remember we look at the zeros. Okay, so fortunately this is all factored for us, and it's easy to tell what the zeros are. So I've listed my factors, then I'm asking what makes that 0. So 0, a 4, a -1, and a 2. All of these have an exponent of 1, so the multiplicity is 1. Because that is odd, that means it's going to cross at each of those. All right, and then another key point to getting a fairly decent, easy sketch is to look at the y-intercept. So the y-intercept means we're going to plug in a 0. Well, if I go back, that'd be a 0 times something times something times something. Well, anything times 0 is 0, so that was a quick arithmetic problem, and we get a 0. So the origin 0, 0 is my y-intercept. Putting this all together, if I can close that, there we go. We're going to have at -1, at 0, at 2, and at 4, matching my zeros here, we're going to have x-intercepts. We know the left and right side both go up, and we know it's crossing at each of those, so we just kind of get this odd-shaped W. Let's look at one more. All right, so this one is also factored, which kind of makes it nice, but I have to think carefully as I multiply this out. Notice that this first factor, x minus 2, is squared. So if you were to multiply that, you would get x squared. Then times this next one, we'd get x to the third. But notice in front, there is a negative sign. So my leading term would be negative x to the third. This time, since I have a negative leading term, that means the right side is going to go down. And because the exponent is odd, that means my sides are going to go opposite directions. So right side down, left side would be up. Let's talk about the middle. Again, we're going to look at the factors. We only have 2 here, and that means I'm going to have 2 zeros. But there is a difference on this one. So the x minus 2, you notice, has an exponent of 2. So that means its multiplicity is 2. Even multiplicities means we touch and bounce off of the x-axis at that point. The other one is, the other 0 is -2. The exponent is 1, so we're going to cross at that point. Once again, I want to find the y-intercept, so if I put a 0 in this first factor, I get a -2. Squaring that gives me a 4. If I put a 0 here, 4 times 2 is 8, but remember there's a negative out front, so when I do that, I get 0, -8 as my y-intercept. All right, so let's put this together. At -2, we have a 0, and at +2, we have a 0. At the -2, we had odd multiplicity, so I crossed through there, but at the +2, I bounce, so I go up and touch it and come back down. And I went ahead and I made my scale on my y-axis so that I could show the y-intercept this time as well.